Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari Gopi Jana Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari Gopi Jana Yashoda Nandana Bhaja Jana Vandana Yashoda Nandana Bhaja Jana Vandana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jai Om Vishnupad. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Pari Rajakacharya and Shtotar Shtata Shri Srimad I.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ishkan Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Pari Rajakacharya Shtotar Shtata Shri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Gorka Shor Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Srila Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thikor Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Vaishnava Sarvabhuma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Shri Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunatha Shri Juga Gopala Bhatta Das Raghunatha Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridasa Kaur Ki Jai. Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakund Radhakund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Gangamai Ki Jai, Yamuna Mai Ki Jai, Devi Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai, Gurunath Raj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Ishkan Vartma Guru Vrinda Ki Jai, Samavita Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Ora Pramanande, Haribol. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru, Sri Guranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayan Namaskritya Naram Jaiva Narottamam Devam Saraswatam Vyasam Tito Jayam Yuridayat Nasta Preshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Nastiki. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayan, and unto Nara Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, and by the rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed. And loving service under the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. All right. Today is January 21st, 2024, and we'll be reading Canto 4, Creation of the Fourth Order, Chapter 21, Instructions by Maharaj Prithu. We'll be doing verse 7. Saeva Madhyana Vacha Cheshtita Karmani Bhuyamsi Mahan Mahatama Gurvan Shashasa Vani Mandalam Yasha Itam Nidhaya Ruruhe Paramparam Saeva Madhyana Vatya Cheshtita Karmani Bhuyamsi Mahan Mahatama Gurvan Shashasa Vani Mandalam Yasha Itam Nidhaya Ruruhe Paramparam Saeva Madhyana Vatya Cheshtita Karmani Bhuyamsi Mahan Mahatama Gurvan Shashasa Vani Mandalam Yasha Spitam Nidhaya Ruruhe Paramparam. Okay, please chant.
Saeva Madhyana Vatya Cheshtita
Saeva Madhyana Vatya Cheshtita
Karmani Bhuyamsi Mahan Mahatamaha
Karmani Bhuyamsi Mahan Mahatama
Gurvan Shashasavani Mandalam Yasha
Gurvan Shashasa Vani Mandalam Yasha Spitam Nidhaya Ruruhe Paramparam.
Saeva Madhyana Vatya Cheshtita
Saeva Madhyana Vatya Cheshtita
Karmani Bhuyamsi Mahan Mahatama
Karmani Bhuyamsi Mahan Mahatama
Gurvan Shashasa Vani Mandalam Yasha
Gurvan Shashasa Vani Mandalam Yasha
Spitam Nidhaya Ruruhe Paramparam
Spitam Nidhaya Ruruhe Paramparam.
Saeva Madhyana Vatya Cheshtita
Saeva Madhyana Vatya Cheshtita
Bhuyamsi Mahan Mahatma
Karmani Bhuyamsi Mahan Mahatama
Gurvan Shashasa Vani Mandalam Yasha
Gurvan Shashasa Vani Mandalam Yasha
Ayaruve Paramparam
Spitam Nidhaya Ruruhe Paramparam.
Madhyana Vatya Cheshtita
Eva Madin Nanavatra Chestita Karmani Bhuyamsi Mahan Mahatama Urvan Shashasa Vanimandalam Yasha Sritam Nidaya Ruruhe Param Param. Anyone else want to try? All right, we'll do word for word. Saha, King Prithu, Evam, thus, Adini, from the very beginning, Anavadya, magnanimous, Cheshtitaha, performing various works, Karmani, work, Bhuyamsi, repeatedly, Mahan, great, Mahatama, greater than the greatest, Kurvan, performing, Shashasa, ruled, Avini Mandalam, the surface of the earth, Yashaha, reputation, Spitam, widespread, Nidhaya, achieving, Aruruhe, was elevated, Parampadam, to the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. King Prithu was greater than the greatest soul and was therefore worshipable by everyone. He performed many glorious activities in ruling over the surface of the world and was always magnanimous. After achieving such great success and a reputation which spread throughout the universe, he at last obtained the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Please repeat. King Prithu was greater than the greatest soul and was therefore worshipable by everyone. He performed many glorious activities in ruling over the surface of the world and was always magnanimous. After achieving such great success and a reputation which spread throughout the universe, he at last obtained the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport. A responsible king or chief executive has many responsible duties to attend to in ruling over the citizens. The most important duty of the monarch or government is to perform various sacrifices, as enjoined in the Vedic literatures. The next duty of the king is to see that every citizen executes the prescribed duties for his particular community. It is the king's duty to see that everyone perfectly executes the duties prescribed for the Varna and Ashram divisions of society. Besides that, as exemplified by King Prithu, he must develop the earth for the greatest possible production of food grains. There are different types of great personalities. Some are positive, great personalities, some comparative, and some superlative. But King Prithu exceeded them, all of them. He is therefore described here as Mahat Tamaha, greater than the greatest. Maharaj Prithu was a Kshatriya, and he discharged his Kshatriya duties perfectly. Similarly, Brahmanas, Vaishyas, and Shudras can discharge their respective duties perfectly, and thus at the ultimate end of life, be promoted to the transcendental world, which is called Parampadam. Parampadam, or the Vaikuntha planets, can be achieved only by devotional service. The impersonal Brahman region is also called Parampadam, but unless one is attached to the personality of Godhead, one must again fall down to the material world from the impersonal Parampadam situation. It is said, therefore, Arudya Krishchena Parampadam Tata. The impersonalist endeavor is very strenuously to achieve the Parampadam, or impersonal Brahmayoti. But unfortunately, being bereft of a relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they come down again to the material world. If one lies in outer space, he can go very high up, but unless he reaches, he must come down again to the earth. Similarly, because the impersonalists who reach the Parampadam of the impersonal Brahmayoti do not enter into the Vaikuntha planets, they come down again to this material world and are given shelter in one of the material planets. Although they may attain Brahmaloka or Satyaloka, all such planets are situated in the material world. Kaya Chakshuram Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Karamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuttapadakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagojahan Sahagana Raganhatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Savadetam Savajutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitam Cha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagapate Gopesha Gopeka Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Rangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Suti Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Anchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, so in this verse, we hear that King Prithu was a great soul and he was worshipable. And the reason he was a great soul and worshipable was because he did his duty as a king and also as a devotee of the Lord. So leaders are supposed to lead by example. We've spent so much time in the fourth canto talking about the importance of a good leader and what their duty is. So we know that the duty of the ruling king is to not only take care of his citizens, but also get them to do their duty as well. Bhagavad Gita says, whatever action a great man performs, common men follow. And whatever standard he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. So there's a really kind of funny example of this. So many years ago, I don't know exactly when, there's a hot dog brand called Nathan's Hot Dogs. And they started in New York City. There was like a hot dog stand. And people at the time didn't want to eat hot dogs because hot dogs are pretty gross. They're made with just kind of the waste products from meat production. And so hot dogs did not have a good reputation, but Nathan's wanted to change this because they want to make that money, right? So they actually hired actors to wear white lab coats and pretend they were doctors and hang outside the hot dog stand and eat hot dogs. And the reason for that is because people, they see doctors as great men, right? And they want to do what the great men are doing. And what do you know? Hot dog sales went through the roof, and now they're like one of the biggest hot dog brands in the country. I don't know about other countries, but and that's all just from hiring some actors to pretend to be doctors. So a doctor has much less status than a king, right? Let alone an actor pretending to be a doctor. But yet, it sold so many hot dogs to do that. So I know that's kind of a silly example, but so a little bit from the purport of that verse is really great here. So I'm going to read a little bit of that. People in general always require a leader who can teach the public by practical behavior. A leader cannot teach the public to stop smoking if he himself smokes. Lord Chaitanya said that a teacher should behave properly before he begins teaching. One who teaches in that way is called acharya, or the ideal teacher. Therefore, a teacher must follow the principles of Shastra to teach the common man. The teacher cannot manufacture rules against the principles of revealed scriptures. The revealed scriptures, like the Manu Samhita and similar others, are considered the standard books to be followed by human society. Thus, the leader's teaching should be based on principles of such standards, Shastras. One who desires to improve himself must follow the standard rules as they are practiced by the great teachers. The Srimad Bhagavatam also affirms that one should follow in the footsteps of great devotees, and that is the way to progress on this path of spiritual realization. The king, or the executive head of state, the father, and the school teacher are all considered to be natural leaders of innocent people in general. As such, natural leaders have great responsibility to their dependents. Therefore, they must be conversant with standard books of moral and spiritual codes. So, do we see this in our leaders today? Like, absolutely not. We do not see, I don't see that, at least in particular, our politicians here in the United States don't seem to be following any moral codes whatsoever, what to speak of any spiritual codes. And I wanted to tell a really kind of silly, it mentioned about a leader cannot teach the public to stop smoking if he himself smokes. So this happened in my own life. My mother, who's, when you're a child, your mother is the greatest leader you have, right? So I remember my mother sitting me down and telling me not to smoke while she was smoking. She's smoking her cigarette, telling me not to smoke. And I didn't take it seriously. And then later I smoked. And that was because I was following the example, the actions of my mother, and not necessarily her words. And so I was just wondering if anybody else has had, an example of that. And this could be an example from your own life or from scripture, where maybe someone not doing their duty, like, my mother was not doing her duty as a parent to be a good example. And so I had a bad result. I ended up smoking, which was a big struggle for most of my life. And then I, ultimately was able to give it up, but it was hard. So Kirtaneshwar Gauranga Das.
The famous story is Sri Gandhi. That some lady brought her child to him and asked him to tell the child to stop eating sweets. And then he said, come back in 3 months or 3 weeks. And so he came back in 3 weeks, and then he said, stop eating sweets, they're bad for you. And the mom said, why didn't you come 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago? He said, because I had to stop eating sweets myself. I can say.
Oh, that's great. Anybody else? Ramnam Prabhu.
Sort of. I think this was going back to teachers, like physical education teachers. I have seen physical education teachers who are not just overweight, but nearly obese, and they're trying to teach their students to be healthy and to work out and to maintain their status. Would you think, once again, that an example would be better than your words?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, Divya Mataji.
This is a little bit of a different take on it. I smoked, because everybody was smoking,
Right.
60s, 70s, and well, maybe a little later. But then I moved into the temple, and I had been smoking, and I moved into the temple, and like a week later, I realized I'd stopped.
Yeah.
I didn't even, you get so engaged, and it wasn't part of the program.
Yeah.
So that's the power of chanting and association.
The power of chanting and association. Association is so important. And I mean, that's kind of part of seeing someone, a great person doing their duty. That's association. You're associating with that person. I think Chandrika had something.
I had a very similar one. My mother smoked also. And, in those days, it was in the magazines, on TV, the commercials and everything about smoking. And so she smoked and said, this is really bad. So I did the same thing. I started smoking, but not for very long. And then I decided this isn't going to work. So I gave it up. But then that was an example to my mother because she gave it up.
Oh, that's wonderful. So the work goes both ways. Yeah, that's great. So, and also when people don't do their duty, things, not only can you influence others, but things can go horribly wrong. So I'm thinking here of like the Challenger spacecraft explosion that happened. That was caused by, the scientists were saying like there's something is faulty with the spacecraft. Huh?
O-rings.
Yeah, the O-ring was faulty. But the people in charge didn't want to stop the mission because, the glory and the money, right? And what ended up happening is like the greatest space disaster our country's had, and which I was watching live in school when that happened. It was quite traumatic to see that happen. The other thing that comes to mind is Titanic, right? One of the greatest shipwrecks or deaths at sea. So I think that happened in 1912.
1911.
In 1911. Okay. And that again, the person in charge, the people were telling he was receiving messages that there was icebergs ahead, that he should be cautious, and he didn't. He went ahead. He wanted to follow the demands of one of the people that had, I think it was I don't think he funded it, but he was a guy like in charge of manufacturing the Titanic, and he followed his demands to get there fast and to disregard the safety warnings. And so many lives were lost. And so now that ship is one of the most remembered ships of all time, but not for the right reasons, not for the reasons that guy in charge wanted them to be. Okay, so we know we have to do our duty, and that leaders should be teaching by example. So let's see. Also, it's better to, as the Bhagavad Gita says, it's better to engage in our own occupation, even though one will do it imperfectly, than to engage in another's occupation and perform it perfectly. And this is because, again, like we should be doing our own duty because things can go wrong. This is what also duties prescribed according to one's nature are never affected by sinful reactions, is what the verse also says. So, okay, so what is the goal of us doing our duties? Does anybody, I can tell you what the goal is not. Okay, so the goal is not to go to heaven. I know a lot of people think that's a goal, particularly Christian people coming from a Christian background. They think the goal of us doing our duty, doing what's right, is so that we can go to heaven and have, really wonderful enjoyment. So this is from Back to Godhead article, as he talks a little bit about the heavenly planets, and it sounds pretty good. So the happiness and pleasures experienced by the denizens of heaven are immensely superior to the happiness found on earth. The chief of the demigods, Indra, is the king of heaven. In Indraloka, the planet where Indra resides, there are gardens where one can associate with angelic, beautiful women and enjoy a profuse supply of somarasa wine, a celestial beverage. There are magnificent palaces, huge gardens with aromatic flowers, beautiful landscapes, etc. There are Gandharvas, celestial beings who sing melodious music all the time. These are the pleasures of the paradise of Indraloka. As one goes further above, beyond Indraloka, celestial realms, the senses and their objects of sense enjoyment become greatly refined. In contrast to those heavenly planets, the sense enjoyment on planet Earth is insignificant and is experienced on an extremely gross level. Of the higher planets is a difference in time scale. Modern scientists also agree that the timing arrangement in other planets is different from that of Earth. 6 months on Earth is equal to 1 day on the heavenly planets. The duration of our life there is 10,000 years by our calculations. So that sounds pretty good, right? going to hang out with beautiful ladies, or probably beautiful men if you're a lady, and hear beautiful music, and sounds really nice. And then not only that, but you get to do it for a very long time, right? Okay, sign me up, right? All right. So, unfortunately, that's not all there is, because the miseries of this planet Earth, birth, old age, disease, and death exist even there. And the Bhagavad Gita says, Krishna says, from the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery wherein repeated birth and death take place. The Srimad Bhagavatam describes various incidents where the demigods are frequently attacked by powerful demons, and in the ensuing war, many times the demigods lose the battle, and as a result, they lose their prestigious positions as controllers of the universe and are in constant anxiety. Srila Prabhupada compared this material world to a prison house. In a prison house, there are different grades of cells for different criminals, depending on the severity of the crime. The criminal is put into a certain cell, most horrible cells for the severest crime committed. Similarly, this universe acts like a prison house where the rebellious living entities are sent to reform themselves and rectify their past mistakes. Depending on his past activities, he's put in a certain living condition where he enjoys or suffers the result of his pious acts, or of his acts. For extremely pious acts, he's sent to heaven, where he enjoys godly delights, and for sinful acts, he goes to hell and suffers there. The thing, however, is that even if someone becomes qualified to enter heaven, he will not be allowed to stay there. Once his accumulated pious credits are exhausted, he's forced to return to earth and start over again. Lord Krishna, when they have thus enjoyed vast heavenly sense pleasures, activities are exhausted, they return to this mortal planet again. Those who seek sense enjoyment by adhering to the principles of the three Vedas achieve only repeated birth and death. So we can see this on a smaller scale here. So many people think, oh gosh, if I won the so much happier, if I had money to take care of all my problems. And yeah, that might solve, paying your rent, or, if you don't have enough food, or you don't have a vehicle, those kind of things. But it's going to bring a whole new set of problems that you didn't even know were problems. And that's because no matter how we try to satisfy our senses, they're never satisfied. We're just like after bigger and bigger and bigger things to satisfy our senses. And ultimately, we're never going to get there, because that's not the goal of life. Okay, so if the goal of life isn't to go to heaven, it's not to satisfy our senses, what else is there? What is the goal of life? So another thing people think might be the goal of life is the avoidance of hell, or the avoidance of hellish conditions. So that is also not the goal of life, but that's really common thought with Christians. They seem to be avoiding hell and running after heaven, but either one of those is not the goal. So here's a kind of a funny little conversation that Srila Prabhupada had with a disciple. So his disciple says, the so-called Christian conception of salvation is based not so much on attraction for the transcendental reality, but as on fear of hell. Srila Prabhupada, this may be the official Christian conception, but the mass of people are not even afraid of hell. They do not even know what hell is, because they are living in hell already. You remember the humorous story when a miner in Sheffield, England, heard some preacher's description of hell. He remained undisturbed. So hell is damp and dark? Oh, well, it is damp and dark here in our mind. What is the difference between hell and our mind? When the miner was informed that in hell there is no newspaper, or to update it, no cell phone, no smartphones, only then did he become disturbed. How horrible! How can anyone live without a newspaper? So people's hellish conditions are here now. Earlier, some of you were describing about the hellish conditions in factories. So people are working in factories. What do they care about hell? Even if I go to hell, I will get a good salary. That is all. Money is required. Then I can drink nicely. So we see this, we see people toiling away, working very, very hard to get very little money. And then they're spending their whole life doing that. And then maybe they get a few hours on the weekend. They can maybe drink some alcohol and try to forget about their week, and maybe watch a movie, maybe spend some intimate time with their partner. And that's it. And then the majority of their life is spent toiling away. They don't even get to stay in that beautiful house that they spent all their time earning, right? They have a big, beautiful house, and they don't even get to be there because they're working so hard just to maintain that. Or worse yet, they can't even get a big, beautiful house. I mean, we see this now because things have become so miserable that wages are so stagnant that people can't even afford to get a house. You know, they end up living with a bunch of roommates, or they're working 4 or 5 jobs, and they still are having a hard time. And I mean, if you work 4 or 5 jobs, you don't even have time to watch a movie and you know, take some intoxication because you're working 4 or 5 jobs. And that's because people are misled about what the goal of life is. So, okay, so what if that's not the goal, then what is the goal? What is the goal of life? Who knows? Krishna, yeah, Krishna. Yeah, love for Krishna, exactly. Yeah, so the goal is devotional service or love of God, right? So, let's see. So the Srimad Bhagavatam says the supreme occupation or dharma for all humanity is that by which men can attain to the loving devotional service unto the transcendent Lord. Such devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted to completely satisfy the self. And let's see here. So we were talking a little bit about the fear of hell. So the Srimad Bhagavatam addresses that as well. Devotees solely engaged in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan, never fear any condition of life. For them, the heavenly planets, liberation, and the hellish planets are all the same. For such devotees are interested only in the service of the Lord. So we know there that not only is that the goal of life, but if we're doing devotional service, then that is our only concern. We don't need to be concerned as, are we going to hell? Are we going to heaven? It doesn't matter. As long as we're serving the Lord, that's the mood we should be aspiring for. So we talked about this, I think, a couple weeks ago, but devotional service, what is devotional service? So that means doing things for the pleasure of Lord Krishna without any desire for your personal pleasure. And so I'm running out of time here, so I'm just going to skip ahead to, so I wanted to tell a story about when Krishna gets a headache. I'm sure some of you have heard this story, but it's so great. So one day, this Krishna's in Dwarka, in his palace in Dwarka, and he says, oh, I'm in so much pain, and everybody's kind of confused, like what, you know, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he can be in pain, and so they call for Narada Muni, and Narada Muni goes to see what's going on. So he goes in his rooms, and they're talking, and Narada Muni comes out, and he goes over to Krishna's queens, and he says, okay, Sri Krishna has a headache. He has a headache. And not only are they shocked that, one, Krishna can get a headache, but they said, well, what can we do about it? He said, well, he needs the dust of your lotus feet. You need to put them on his head, and that'll cure his headache. And his queens are shocked. They say, oh, no, we can't do that. That is not proper at all. We'll go to hell for sure. There's no way. We can't do that. So Narada Muni goes around Dwarka and he asks all kinds of different people, and all of them are like, no, I couldn't possibly do that. I couldn't possibly do that. Eventually, Narada Muni's traveling everywhere, asking all these people, please, Krishna has a headache. Please, he just needs the dust of your lotus feet, the dust of the lotus feet of someone who loves him, to cure his headache. And no one is giving up dust of their lotus feet because they don't it would be improper. They said this is not the right thing to do, and I surely would go to hell. So finally, Narada Muni ends up in Vrindavan, and I've heard two versions of this. One is that he sees the gopis, and the other is that he sees Radha, who is also a gopi. But he goes to Radharani, our dear Srimati Radharani, and says, "Please, Krishna has a headache, and he needs the dust from your lotus feet in order to cure it." And immediately, without thinking, Radha immediately gathers the dust from her lotus feet. Says, "Here, please, take it to him." And Narada Muni says to her, "Aren't you afraid that you're going to go to hell? This isn't, it's not proper." And she said, "It doesn't matter. Krishna has a headache. Please, why are you wasting time? Go." And so he takes Radharani's dust from her lotus feet and ultimately cures Krishna's headache. And so this story just illustrates the mood that we should have. Radharani was willing to give up social convention, give up any kind of decent life. If she had to go to hell, it would not be pleasant at all. And it didn't matter to her. All that mattered to her was satisfying Krishna's needs and senses, making sure that Krishna's headache went away. And so that is the mood that we should all aspire for. So I didn't tell that story as nicely as this other person was telling it to me, but I apologize. So with that, I guess we'll end here. And if there's any questions or comments. And I did have a question for you guys, is if anybody had a story about devotional service from your own life, maybe where devotional service didn't, was, maybe you were doing something really mundane, but it felt really glorious because you were doing it for the Lord. I have a small example of that, and then you guys could give some examples. But when I first moved in here to the temple, one of the service that I was given, it was pretty impossible service. Mother Sundamini had asked me and Kirtaneshwara and Elijah to clean this fountain that's out there on the patio. And there's all these like hard water stains on it. And she was like, "Yeah, get those off of there." And it was like impossible because you couldn't get them off. And then I figured out, so we're just scrubbing and scrubbing and scrubbing. We're trying all different things. We got like a belt sander out and everything, like, which I was worried because there's like water. I'm like, what if we drop it in the water and then we're all going to be electrocuted? The only thing I found that worked was like to get like a razor blade and like scraping it off, and like, which is very, very laborious. Yeah, very tedious and laborious. It also made this horrible high-pitched screeching noise when you did it. And so it was just like really not an appealing service at all. But I had the greatest time doing it. And that still sticks in my memory, even though the task was virtually impossible. It was just, I don't know how to describe it other than I felt so much happiness and bliss doing it. And I would never feel that way if, like I worked at, some office and they said, "Go clean that fountain." I wouldn't feel that way at all. And so this is just a really small example I have about how devotional service, even the most mundane things, can be glorious. So, all right, with that, does anybody have any comments or a story about their devotional service from their own life? Ram Nam Prabhu.
I don't think I'm going to tell a story about devotional service, but an interesting comment on either whatever system we're in, whether we're a Shastra or a Sudra, any job that we're doing, shouldn't it always be done for devotional service?
Should any job?
So every job that we do to fulfill our service, shouldn't it always be done with devotional service? that all of it's being for the Lord. For example, if the fountain wasn't at the temple, but the fountain was somewhere else, shouldn't you be doing it as if it was
Yes,
for
ideally,
Krishna?
yes,
Okay.
yes, we should. Ideally, if I was working at an office, but I was doing, work using the proceeds from that job to donate to the temple or something like that. Yeah, but generally, if I was working at an office, I was doing that to satisfy my own senses, and so therefore it was miserable. But yes, ideally, we should be doing all of our work as an offering to Krishna. Yeah. Anyone else? Parameshwar Prabhu.
You spoke about times in devotional service was got listed out. I mean, I don't want to brag about myself with this one, but it's really far out. So there's 7 or 8 of us in sometimes a black van on the Warp Tour, and the van's smaller than the one I have. 7 or 8 of us, and show to show, back to back to back, 6-hour drive in between them. Like I think it was 131 degrees at we didn't have air conditioning in the vehicle, and on some of the shows it was really super duper hot. Anyway, and I remember at night we just got to find any spot, so we go into this truck stop, this really crammed in between 2 trucks. I remember this point where they're just rumbling their engines to keep the AC going. We didn't have, and so I got out to just crash. There's mosquitoes, so many of them, that you have to get yourself into the sleeping bag. So it's about maybe 94 degrees at night. So I get in the sleeping bag. This is a 0-degree bag. That's all I had. And so you can just, otherwise you're going to get bit like, and you won't get any sleep.
Sure.
So I'm sweating like anything in the bag with these trucks going, with probably no sleep. Maybe this is the 20th day of the show, back to back, with 7 of us in a van, hot van. And you get blitz, and there's tons of books go out though. So that was the purpose. It was such a yugya. And then you got the crickets going. Usually crickets drive people crazy. Tons of crickets. And right then I remember just lying down, and literally it all turned into like a spiritual symphony. Literally, like the ultimate, and it crescendoed. And I remember just going into pulses of ecstasy, like it turned into like a symphony from the spiritual world, all the sounds and everything, even the highway right by, everything just turned a complete symphony. I was in so much ecstasy, I didn't know if I would live through it. It was in that much ecstasy I was experiencing. It was just like, how is this possible? Sometimes the Warp Tour on basically, like your average person is just going, they're like, they sound like actually like pigs in a slaughterhouse no, seriously. They're screaming something, punk rock. They sound like pigs in a slaughterhouse. And I remember hearing, when I was distributing the books, hearing lyrics from transcendental lyrics that they're saying. And going, how is this possible? Just by plugging in properly, surrendering, it just turns out blissful for the person doing that, but everybody else is having a really bad time. That isn't like really surrendering.
Right.
I don't mean it isn't a bragging thing, but it was really far out. And one last thing, I remember having a horrible day at University of Madison distributing books. I had a wrong mentality, completely wrong mentality, and nobody was taking books, and people were so nasty to me. I remember Vijay saying, "Everywhere's a good spot. Everywhere's a good spot if you have the right mood," or something like that, right, on Sankirtan. So I went, okay, and then I just prayed to Krishna, some nice prayer, and literally I remember seeing every single person that seemed to come to me had like a Om t-shirt on with some crystal, and they took tons of books, like literally just in a switch. And the stucco, I remember walking by the stucco on this like this is almost stucco, it sticks out a little more, and it looked like Sanskrit lyrics everywhere. It's like, what? Just a shift of consciousness. That's it. You go into Radharani's mood, just that shift, everything just becomes wow.
Wow, that's amazing. It's so inspiring too, and for us to really have that mood of surrender I mean, anybody else in those conditions would have been so miserable. And to hear, I mean, you've heard a firsthand account
I
of,
mean, I have horrible consciousness throughout the whole show, but I'm speaking about a few moments of like.
sure. Wonderful. All right. Any other comments or questions? Okay, we'll end here. Sure.
I hear this a lot. I hear this a lot. That, you should just do your work for Krishna, and that's good. You're good to go. But the Shastra really speaks of doing some karma job. You're getting karma for that,
Yeah.
and it's not service to God. It's not for unless you take the paycheck that you're getting and you use that in Krishna's service. That's the only part that's service to God.
Right.
The rest is karma that binds you to this material dimension.
Yeah.
So I think that should be really clear, because I've heard that in a class a couple of years ago from us, and I'm like, the people I think were confused after hearing that. So I unless I've completely misunderstood reading all of Prabhupada's books, but that's really
Right.
the reality of the situation. I mean, ultimately, if you're working a job and you're giving the funds to Krishna, you probably want to save as much energy, do as kind of sense of poor of a job as possible to get the maximum paycheck
Right.
to give to Krishna, and then you don't tax yourself so much. So that would be the ultimate use of energy.
Yeah.
For Krishna's pleasure, because just to make some greedy person more wealthy so he can go to the casino and become more of an alcoholic is not service to God.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're working so you can donate money to the service of Krishna, by all means, do it as best as you can. But if you're working to satisfy your own senses, it's not the goal at all. That's not where it's at.
The only reason why you would do the job well is to get the paycheck. The only thing Krishna could care less if that casino worker that you're working for, casino boss, making the casino so nice that it attracts more customers.
Right.
It's not service to God at all.
Yeah, that reminds me of during World War II, Oscar Schindler had a munitions factory, and he was saving. So I mean, he was a war profiteer. He wasn't like some real stand-up guy, but he was saving so many Jews and other vulnerable populations during the World War II to make them be workers in his factory. But he didn't want them to actually make bombs and bullets and things that would actually work, because that would be counterproductive. So there was rumors going around that he was miscalibrating the machines. And so then, when the army would come back to him and say like, hey, your bullets were misfiring, or he would just say, oh, these things happen in production, so he was doing the job, but maybe not the best he could have done it, because he knew it was not right. So, yes, Kirtaneshwara Gurungadas.
Well, my understanding, just to comment back on what Parameshwar Prabhu was saying, is my understanding is that a job or a duty can be done for Krishna if it's done in karma yoga, meaning that it's not bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga, Vishwanath describes bhakti yoga as the 9 processes. And so we can't necessarily do jobs in the Kali Yuga very easily in karma yoga, because all of our jobs are sinful by nature.
Right.
We have to, like selling alcohol, selling meat, that can't be done in karma yoga unless you have to give some profit to Krishna. But on the other side of things is that the process of dasyam becomes dasyam when it is given to you by the spiritual master. So the spiritual master tells you, you support your family. If the spiritual master is encouraging you in that way, and that's what you're doing, and that process becomes transcendental by the process of dasyam. So Arjuna's duty was to fight. And so Krishna is telling him, why are you not fighting? You can go to the heavenly planets if you fight, because such fighting opportunities come unsought. So opening the doors of the heavenly planet. So Krishna is speaking on a lower level at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. But then as he raises Arjuna, ultimately says, because I want you to fight, tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mamanusmaram yudhyacha, I want you to fight. So because I'm ordering you to fight, now that process of fighting, which was once karma, is becoming bhakti. So if someone is doing some job or any activity under the direction of the devotee, whether it be whatever it may be, if that's to raise their family or to do whatever service, give something to the temple, then my understanding is that it becomes an act of bhakti.
I don't kind of go, but yeah, that was a war that Krishna wanted to fight. And yeah, if your spiritual master says you got to support your family, it's the duty for you to perform. But then what if obviously the person's a disciple, so his temple is his home, so he's supporting his temple.
Mhm.
So that part of it's bhakti. So if it's for that, then it's bhakti. But just a job
Right.
for it is not at all. So like, yeah, you be giving money, or maybe you have some extra money, give the temple. That's when it turns into bhakti. You're supporting your devotee children, raising them to become Krishna consciousness. Here's some prasadam that I bought from working in this job.
Right.
But yeah. Okay. Just want to make that clear because it was a misunderstanding.
Like that, because the karma yoga process, like Krishna is saying, you just do your duty. That process doesn't work in the Kali Yuga. That's why bhakti is only recommended, because all of our essentially karma yoga begins at varnashrams. We don't have varnashram. All of our duties are sinful here.
Right.
You can't go to the bar or do your job at the casino for Krishna. You can't do it.
All right. Well, we're going to end on that. A little after 9, so Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.